They looked at her hoodie and saw a trespasser. They looked at her skin and saw a problem. What the crew of Flight 402 didn't see was the woman who had signed their paychecks just hours before. When lead flight attendant Brent Carver snatched the champagne glass from Naomi Vance's hand, sneering that first class is for paying customers, he didn't just break protocol, he sealed his own fate. He thought he was kicking a stowaway off his plane, but he was actually declaring war on the new owner of the airline. And the termination letters? They were already being drafted in her head. The automatic doors of JFK's Terminal 4 slid open, letting in a gust of biting November wind. But Naomi Vance didn't feel the cold. She felt the weight of the portfolio tucked securely inside her battered leather tote bag. To anyone passing by, Naomi looked like a tired college student or perhaps a weary artist returning from a long weekend. She wore an oversized charcoal gray hoodie, black leggings, and worn-out sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore no makeup. There was no entourage, no black SUV idling at the curb, no personal assistant frantically whispering into a headset. Just Naomi. That was exactly how she wanted it. Yesterday afternoon, the ink had dried on the acquisition deal that made her the majority shareholder and CEO of Sterling High Altitude, a legacy airline that had seen better days. The press release was scheduled for Monday morning. Today was Saturday. For 48 hours, Naomi Vance was a ghost. She wanted to see her investment from the inside out, without the polished veneer of a scheduled inspection. She wanted to know how Sterling High treated its passengers when they thought no one important was watching. She approached the check-in counter for first class. The line was empty. Behind the counter stood a man with perfectly gelled blonde hair and a name tag that read Brent. He was typing furiously on his phone, smiling at whatever was on the screen. Naomi cleared her throat. "Good morning. Checking in for Flight 402 to London." Brent didn't look up. He held up a finger, finishing his text message, then let out a sharp laugh before finally sliding his phone into his pocket. His eyes flicked over Naomi, starting at her sneakers and ending at her messy bun. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of practiced boredom. "Economy check-in is the kiosks, down the hall to the left," Brent said, pointing vaguely without making eye contact. "This line is for first class and diamond status members only." "I know," Naomi said, her voice calm. She placed her passport on the counter. "I'm in first class." Brent let out a sigh that was loud enough to be a performance. He picked up the passport with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated, and opened it. He typed the name into the terminal, his eyebrows raising, skeptically. "Naomi Vance," he muttered. He hit a key, and his eyes narrowed. The screen clearly showed a confirmed, full-fare first-class ticket, paid for in cash. But Brent didn't see a VIP. He saw a glitch. He saw someone who didn't fit the aesthetic he prided himself on maintaining in his cabin. "System's lagging," he lied, tapping the counter. "It's showing a seat assignment, but frankly, it looks like a duplicate booking. We've been having issues with third-party discount sites overselling seats. I can't check you in here." Naomi watched him carefully. She knew the system wasn't lagging. She had designed the back-end patch herself 2 years ago when she consulted for the airline's IT division, the job that had given her the capital to start her own equity firm. "I booked directly through the airline's website," Naomi said, her tone hardening slightly. "There is no third party. Please print my boarding pass." Brent leaned over the counter, his voice dropping to a patronizing faux whisper. "Look, miss, I'm trying to save you some embarrassment. If you bought a hacked ticket off some forum, it's not going to work. Security is tight today. Why don't you just step aside so I can help actual passengers?" "Actual passengers?" Naomi repeated. "You haven't even scanned the passport." "I don't need to scan it to know there's a problem," Brent snapped, his customer service mask slipping. "Now move, or I call security." Naomi felt the familiar heat of injustice rising in her chest, but she tamped it down. This was data. This was research. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, displaying the QR code from her confirmation email. "Scan it," she commanded. It wasn't a request. Brent, blinked, taken aback by the sudden authority in her voice. Reluctantly, he grabbed the scanner gun and beeped the phone screen. The printer whirred instantly. A first-class boarding pass, seat 1A, slid out. Brent stared at the piece of paper as if it had personally insulted him. He ripped it off the machine and slid it across the counter, not handing it to her, but letting it drift near the edge. "Boarding is in 40 minutes, he said, turning his back on her to look at the empty lane behind her. "Don't expect the lounge. It's at capacity." "The app says the lounge is at 40% capacity," Naomi noted, picking up her ticket. "For you," Brent said over his shoulder, "it's full." Naomi walked away, her grip on the boarding pass tight. She didn't go to the lounge. She went straight to the gate, sat in the corner, and watched. She watched Brent laugh with a wealthy-looking couple wearing designer coats. She watched him upgrade a man in a suit just because they knew the same golf club. She watched, and she remembered. Boarding Flight 402 was chaos. The gate area was overcrowded, and the tension in the air was palpable. When the call for first-class boarding came, Naomi stood up. She was the first in line. At the gate door stood a woman with severe dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail. Her uniform was immaculate, but her expression was sour. Her name tag read Tiffany. She was chatting with Brent, who had moved from the check-in counter to the gate to assist with boarding. As Naomi approached, Tiffany stepped physically in front of the scanner, blocking the path. "Group 1 only right now," Tiffany said sharply, looking past Naomi to the businessman behind her. "Sir, if you could just step around this lady." "I am Group 1, Naomi said, holding out her boarding pass. Tiffany looked down at the pass, then at Naomi, then at Brent. A look of silent communication passed between them. A smirk that said, "Oh, it's this one." "Hold on, sir," Tiffany said to the businessman, putting a hand on his arm and smiling flirtatiously. "Just a minor delay with a confused passenger." She turned back to Naomi, her smile vanishing. "Let me see that." She snatched the boarding pass from Naomi's hand. Tiffany scrutinized it, bending the paper, checking the back, acting as if she were inspecting a counterfeit bill. "Seat 1A, Tiffany read aloud, her voice dripping with skepticism. "This is a crew rest seat, usually. I don't know how you got this." "I purchased it," Naomi said. "Is there a problem with the seat?" "The problem," Brent interjected, stepping up beside Tiffany, "is that we have a very strict dress code for first class on international flights. We try to maintain a certain atmosphere." Naomi looked down at her hoodie. "Sterling High has no dress code for paying passengers. I checked the carriage contract. As long as I am not obscene or barefoot, I am within my rights." "It's at the crew's discretion," Brent lied smoothly. "And frankly, you look like you're going for a jog, not a transatlantic flight. It makes the other passengers uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable," the businessman behind Naomi piped up. He was an older man with silver hair and a kind face. "Actually, I'm uncomfortable waiting. She has a ticket." "Let her on." Brent's face flushed pink. He hated being contradicted by the people he sought to impress. "Mr. Henderson, we're just ensuring security protocols. We've had issues with fraudulent upgrades lately. She's holding a valid pass," Mr. Henderson insisted. "Scan her through." Tiffany glared at Naomi. She realized making a scene in front of a Platinum member like Mr. Henderson wasn't a good move. She aggressively beeped Naomi's pass. The light turned green. "Fine," Tiffany hissed, leaning in so only Naomi could hear. "But don't think you're getting special treatment. You stay in your seat, you stay quiet, and you don't bother the real clients. Got it?" Naomi didn't respond. She walked down the jet bridge, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a cold, calculating fury. Upon entering the aircraft, the contrast was stark. The first class cabin of the Boeing 777 was luxurious. Lie-flat pods, soft ambient lighting, and the scent of lavender. Naomi found seat 1A. It was the prime spot, offering the most privacy. She stowed her tote bag and sat down, pulling her hoodie up slightly to cover her face as she settled in. She wanted to disappear until takeoff. Minutes passed. The cabin filled up. Mr. Henderson took seat 2A across the aisle. He gave Naomi a polite nod, which she returned. Then, Tiffany entered the cabin to begin the pre-flight service. She carried a silver tray with crystal flutes of champagne and warm nuts. She moved down the aisle, her voice syrupy sweet. "Champagne, Mr. Henderson. So good to see you again. Thank you, Tiffany. Mrs. Galloway, lovely scarf. Can I get you a mimosa?" She served every single person in the cabin. When she reached row 1, she turned her back to Naomi and began arranging magazines in the rack. Naomi waited. She knew this game. It was the silent treatment, designed to make her feel invisible. "Excuse me?" Naomi said firmly. Tiffany froze. She turned around slowly, her face a mask of annoyance. "Yes? May I have a glass of water, please?" "We're doing champagne service right now," Tiffany clipped. "Water is after takeoff." "You just served the gentleman in 3B a sparkling water," Naomi pointed out. "That was sparkling water. We are out of bottled still water until we reach cruising altitude." Tiffany lied effortlessly. "You can wait." "I'll have champagne then," Naomi challenged. Tiffany looked at the tray. There was one glass left. She looked at Naomi, then picked up the glass and drank it herself in one swift gulp, right there in the aisle. "Oops," Tiffany smirked, setting the empty glass down on Naomi's console. "All out. I'll check the galley. It might take a while." She turned on her heel and walked away. Across the aisle, Mr. Henderson looked shocked. "Did she just—" "Yes," Naomi said quietly. "She did." "That's outrageous," Mr. Henderson said, reaching for his call button. "No," Naomi said, stopping him with a raised hand. "Please, let it play out." "Why?" he asked, confused. Naomi turned to him, and for the first time, she allowed a small, dangerous smile to touch her lips. "Because I need to see how far they will go." Just then the cockpit door opened. The captain, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Richard Sterling, no relation to the airline founders, though he acted like it, stepped out to use the lavatory. He saw Brent and Tiffany whispering furiously in the galley, gesturing towards seat 1A. Captain Sterling adjusted his hat and walked over to where Naomi sat. He didn't look happy. He looked like a man who had been told there was a rodent in his pristine kitchen. "Ma'am," Captain Sterling boomed, his voice projecting through the quiet cabin. "I'm Captain Sterling. My crew tells me you're being disruptive." Naomi stayed seated, looking up at him, calmly. "Disruptive? I've asked for a water. I haven't even unbuckled my seatbelt. They say you were verbally abusive to the head attendant, and that you pushed past the gate agent," Sterling said, crossing his arms. "Now, I don't know how you got this ticket, and quite frankly, I don't care. But on my plane, my crew is the law. If they say you're a problem, you're a problem." "I haven't raised my voice once," Naomi said. "Ask Mr. Henderson." Sterling didn't look at Mr. Henderson. He loomed over Naomi. "I'm going to give you one choice. You can grab your bag and move to economy, row 44, middle seat. We have an open spot there. Or I can have the Port Authority escort you off the plane for endangering the flight crew. Which is it going to be?" The cabin went deadly silent. Every passenger was watching. Naomi slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up. She was shorter than Sterling, but in that moment she seemed to take up all the oxygen in the room. "You are ordering me to economy, because why exactly?" Naomi asked, her voice crystal clear. "Because you don't fit the profile of our first-class cabin," Sterling said, dropping the pretense. "And you are upsetting the dynamic. Now move." Naomi looked at Brent, who was smirking in the galley. She looked at Tiffany, who was checking her nails. And finally, she looked at the captain. "I'll move," Naomi said. She stepped into the aisle, grabbed her bag, and began to walk toward the back. But she didn't stop at row 44. She stopped in the galley, right between first and business, where the main communication handset was located. "What do you think you're doing?" Brent barked, rushing forward. Naomi turned, her hand hovering over the all-call button that would broadcast to the entire plane. "I'm not going to seat 44, Brent," she said. "I'm making an announcement." "Don't you touch that phone!" Captain Sterling shouted, lunging for her. But he was too slow. The shrill whine of microphone feedback cut through the cabin, followed by the distinct ding-dong of the public address system activating. Every head in first class turned. In economy, hundreds of passengers paused their movies and looked up from their books. Captain Sterling's hand clamped onto Naomi's forearm, his grip painful. "Drop it," he snarled, his face inches from hers, his breath hot with coffee and fury. "You are interfering with flight operations. That's a federal offense." Naomi didn't flinch. She looked at his hand on her arm, then up into his eyes. "Assaulting a passenger is also a felony, Captain, and right now, there are about 50 cell phones recording you." Sterling hesitated. He flicked his eyes toward the cabin and saw the telltale glow of screens held aloft. He released her arm as if burned, stepping back with a curse. Brent and Tiffany stood paralyzed in the galley entrance, their earlier arrogance evaporating into pure, unadulterated panic. They knew that sound. The all-call overrode everything. In-flight entertainment, pre-recorded safety briefings, even the cockpit's private channel. Naomi brought the handset to her lips. Her voice didn't shake. It was the voice that had stared down hostile boardrooms and negotiated multi-billion-dollar mergers. It was calm, authoritative, and terrifyingly cold. "Good morning, passengers and crew of Flight 402 bound for London," Naomi began. Her voice echoed slightly through the metallic speakers, filling every corner of the Boeing 777. "My name is Naomi Vance." She paused, letting the name hang in the pressurized air. In the cockpit, the first officer, who was running pre-flight checks, froze. He knew that name. Everyone in aviation knew that name as of yesterday afternoon. "For those of you who haven't read the financial news this morning," Naomi continued, her eyes locked on Captain Sterling, who was rapidly paling, "I am the CEO of Vance Capital. As of 4 p.m. yesterday, my firm acquired a controlling 51% stake in Sterling High Altitude Airlines." The silence in the aircraft was absolute. It was a vacuum. You could hear the faint hum of the auxiliary power unit and the terrified breathing of Brent Carver. Brent looked at Tiffany. Tiffany looked at the floor. Neither of them could move. They had just spent the last hour sneering at, ignoring, and actively degrading their new boss. "I decided to fly commercial today to experience the Sterling High standard of service firsthand," Naomi said into the handset, her voice hardening like steel. "What I experienced instead was a masterclass in bigotry, unprofessionalism, and staggering incompetence." Captain Sterling looked like he was having a cardiac event. He opened his mouth to speak, to interrupt her, but no sound came out. He was watching his career disintegrate in real time. "I was racially profiled at the check-in counter by lead attendant Brent Carver, who refused to believe a black woman in a hoodie could afford a first-class ticket," Naomi broadcasted to 300 people. "I was denied basic service and had my drink stolen by flight attendant Tiffany Davis because I didn't fit her aesthetic for the cabin. And finally, I was threatened with arrest and ordered to the back of the plane by Captain Richard Sterling simply because his racist crew found my presence disruptive." A gasp rippled through the economy cabin. In first class, Mr. Henderson unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up in the aisle, glaring at the captain. "This flight is canceled," Naomi announced, dropping the bombshell. "I will not allow this aircraft to take off under the command of this crew. We will be returning to the gate immediately. I apologize to the paying passengers for the inconvenience. You will all be rebooked with substantial compensation. As for the crew," she lowered the handset slowly, letting the sentence hang unfinished. Then, with a deliberate click, she cradled the phone. The intercom dinged off. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. It was the silence of a judge's gavel hitting the sound block. Captain Sterling found his voice. It was a cracked, desperate whisper. "Miss Vance. Surely there's been a misunderstanding. If we had known it was you, if you had known it was me, you would have treated me like a human being." Naomi cut him off, her voice low and lethal in the quiet galley. "That's the entire point, Captain. You shouldn't need to know someone's net worth to treat them with basic dignity. You failed the test. Miserably." "We can fix this," Brent stammered, stepping forward, his hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. He looked nauseous. "Please, Miss Vance, I was just having a bad morning. The system really was lagging, I swear." "Stop lying, Brent," Naomi said, looking at him with profound disgust. "I wrote the code for that system. It doesn't lag. You just didn't want me on your plane." She turned to the captain, who looked shrunken in his uniform. "Captain Sterling, return to the cockpit. Inform ground control that we are returning to the gate due to a personnel emergency. Do not take off. If those wheels move 1 inch, I will have the FAA pull your license before we reach the end of the runway." Sterling looked at her, then at his terrified crew. He realized the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. He was no longer the commander of this vessel. He was just an employee facing the wrath of ownership. Without a word, head bowed, Captain Sterling turned and slunk back into the cockpit, closing the heavy reinforced door behind him. The atmosphere in the cabin during the short taxi back to the gate was poisonous. The aircraft, usually a noisy environment of engine spooling and air rushing, was tomb-silent, save for the hushed, furious whispers of the passengers. Tiffany Davis had fled to the rear galley, unable to face the first-class cabin she had preened in just minutes before. She was reportedly hyperventilating near the lavatories in economy. Brent Carver was forced to remain at his station at the front, facing the passengers. He stood rigid by the forward exit door, his face the color of chalk. He couldn't look anyone in the eye, least of all Naomi, who sat calmly in seat 1A, typing on her phone. Every few seconds, Brent would twitch, as if physically repelling the waves of judgment, radiating from the rows of wealthy, influential people he had spent years sucking up to. They were now looking at him like he was something scraped off a shoe. Mr. Henderson leaned across the aisle toward Naomi. "Ms. Vance," he said quietly, his tone full of respect. "I want you to know, I saw everything. The check-in, the gate, the water incident. If you need a statement for whatever happens next, you have my full cooperation." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Naomi said, offering him a genuine smile. "I appreciate that. My legal team might be in touch." "Good," he nodded grimly, glaring at Brent's back. "People like that give wealth a bad name. They think it's a license to belittle others. It's disgusting." The plane jerked to a stop. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. The sound of the jetway extending toward the door was agonizingly slow. Normally, the end of a flight brought a bustle of activity. Bags being retrieved, coats being donned. Now nobody moved. They were waiting for the show. The cabin door opened with a heavy thunk. The cool air of the jet bridge rushed in, smelling of jet fuel and damp concrete. A young, confused gate agent, not Tiffany, poked her head in. "Captain, we weren't expecting you back. Is there a medical?" Her voice trailed off as she took in the scene. The rigid flight attendant, the stony-faced passengers, and the woman in the hoodie in seat 1A, who seemed to be emitting an aura of pure command. "There is a personnel issue," Naomi said, standing up and slinging her tote bag over her shoulder. She walked to the front of the cabin. Brent shrank back against the bulkhead as she approached, terrified she might actually strike him. She didn't even look at him. She stepped past him onto the jet bridge. "Everyone off," Naomi commanded over her shoulder. "Crew included. Leave your bags. We are holding a meeting in the gate area." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Slowly, the deplaning began. The first-class passengers filed out, many pausing to offer Naomi words of support or shakes of the head in disbelief at the crew's behavior. As the economy passengers began to shuffle past the cockpit, Naomi stood at the end of the jet bridge, inside the terminal, waiting. Finally, the crew emerged. Captain Sterling led the way, his hat removed, holding it in both hands like a steering wheel he no longer controlled. Behind him came Brent, looking like a man walking to the gallows. Finally, Tiffany emerged, her eyes red-rimmed, her immaculate makeup streaked with tears. The rest of the flight crew followed, looking confused and terrified by association. They stood in a loose semicircle in the gate area, under the harsh fluorescent lights of Terminal 4. The gate area was packed with the recently deplaned passengers, who refused to leave, forming a massive, silent audience. Naomi stood facing them. She was still in her leggings and hoodie, but the clothes no longer mattered. She held the power. "Line up," Naomi said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the terminal noise. They hesitated. I said, "Line up, shoulder to shoulder, right here." She pointed to the stretch of gray industrial carpet in front of the boarding desk. Slowly, humiliatingly, Captain Sterling, Brent, and Tiffany shuffled into a line, like naughty schoolchildren. The other flight attendants bunched together slightly apart from them, desperate to distance themselves from the blast zone. Naomi pulled out her phone. She held it up, showing the screen to the captain. It was a conference call app, connected and live. On the line, Naomi said, her voice deceptively light, "I have Petra Simmons, the VP of Human Resources for Sterling High. I also have David Chen, head of legal. And just for good measure, the Port Authority police are on their way up." Tiffany let out a small, strangled sob. Brent's knees actually buckled slightly. "They have heard everything," Naomi said. "I patched them in the moment we pulled away from the gate. They heard your lies, Captain. They heard your sniveling apologies, Brent. Ms. Vance, please." Captain Sterling begged, his voice trembling. "I have 20 years with this airline. My pension, my reputation. Your reputation is what you made it today, Richard," Naomi said, using his first name deliberately to strip him of his rank. "You had a choice. You chose to back bigotry instead of truth. You chose to intimidate a passenger you thought was powerless." She stepped closer to Brent, who was staring at his polished shoes. "Look at me, Brent," she commanded. He slowly raised his eyes. There was no smugness left, only terror. "You said first class was for paying customers," Naomi said softly. "You were right. It is. And you know who pays the most? I do. I just bought the whole damn airline." She turned to the phone in her hand. "Petra, are you there?" A crisp, professional female voice came through the phone's speaker. "I'm here, Ms. Vance. I have the files open." "Excellent," Naomi said. She looked at the three people trembling before her. The executioner's axe was raised. "Let's begin." The arrival of the Port Authority police added a layer of official dread to the scene at Gate B42. Two uniformed officers approached, their presence causing the crowd of onlookers to part slightly. They weren't there to arrest Naomi. They were there because the new owner of the airline had requested a security presence for a hostile termination event. Naomi acknowledged the officers with a nod but kept her focus on the three employees lined up against the ticket counter. The hum of the terminal seemed to fade away, leaving only the localized storm at the gate. "Petra," Naomi said into the phone, her eyes fixed on the captain. "Let's start with Richard Sterling, employee ID 4922A. "Got him," the HRVP's voice cracked over the speakerphone. "Richard Sterling, senior captain on the 777 fleet." "Richard," Naomi began, addressing him like a disappointed school principal. "You violated federal aviation regulations regarding passenger intimidation. You failed to investigate a legitimate complaint. You conspired with your crew to deny service based on bias. And you attempted to physically assault me by grabbing my arm when I went to report your conduct." Sterling flinched. "It wasn't assault. I was just trying to stop you from—" "Petra," Naomi cut in. "What is the company policy on physical contact with a passenger during a non-emergency situation? Immediate suspension pending investigation, usually leading to termination." Petra recited instantly. "There's your investigation," Naomi said coldly. "He did it. 50 witnesses saw it. Terminate his contract immediately. For cause. Sterling's jaw dropped. You can't just... I just did, Naomi said. You're fired, Richard. Hand over your ID badge and your cockpit keys to the officer. Sterling stood frozen, a man watching his entire identity crumble. He looked at the police officer, who held out a hand expectantly. With shaking fingers, the ex-captain unpinned the wings from his shirt, the symbol of his authority, and unclipped his ID. He dropped them into the officer's hand. He looked suddenly old, stripped of the uniform's power. Escort him out of the secure area, Naomi directed the officer. He is no longer an employee and has no business airside. Sterling was led away, walking with a zombie-like shuffle, past the staring eyes of the passengers he had been ready to fly across the Atlantic just an hour ago. Naomi turned her attention to Tiffany Davis. Tiffany was already crying silently, mascara tracking black streaks down her cheeks. She was shaking her head slightly, mouthing, "No, please, no." Tiffany Davis, Naomi read from her mental notes. The gatekeeper who decides who looks. First class. Enough. I'm so sorry, Tiffany whispered, her voice hitching. I was just following Brent's lead. I didn't mean... Save it, Naomi snapped. You didn't just follow his lead. You reveled in it. You blocked me at the gate. You stole my drink. You lied about the water. You treated me like dirt on your shoe because you thought I couldn't fight back. Naomi took a step closer, her voice dropping to an icy whisper that only Tiffany could hear. You know what the worst part was, Tiffany? The smile. That sweet fake smile you gave Mr. Henderson right before you glared at me. That's the real you. The cruelty under the mask. She straightened up and spoke into the phone. Petra. Tiffany Davis. Gross misconduct. Theft of cabin inventory. She drank the champagne intended for a passenger. And violation of the company's anti-discrimination policy. Processed, Petra said efficiently. Termination effective immediately. Badge, Naomi demanded, holding out her hand. Tiffany fumbled for her lanyard, sobbing openly now. She yanked it off, breaking the clasp, and slapped it into Naomi's palm before burying her face in her hands. Get out of here, Naomi said, tossing the badge onto the counter behind her. Go collect your things from your locker. If you're not off airport property in an hour, I'll have you trespassed. Tiffany fled, running down the concourse toward the crew exit, the sound of her crying trailing behind her. Finally, Naomi turned to Brent Carver. Brent was the architect of the entire morning's disaster. He was the one at the check-in counter. He was the one who set the tone. He was the one who had looked at Naomi Vance and decided she was nothing. He stood alone now against the counter. No captain to hide behind. No Tiffany to share the blame. And then there was one, Naomi said softly. Brent didn't speak. He couldn't. He looked like he was about to faint. His perfect blonde hair seemed suddenly limp. His suit, cheap. You know, Brent, Naomi said contemplatively, walking slowly around him as if inspecting a faulty piece of machinery. I was actually doing a case study today. I wanted to see if Sterling High's reputation for poor service was a systemic issue or just a few bad apples. She stopped directly in front of him. You proved to me that the rot starts at the front line. You saw my ticket. You saw it was real. You saw it was full fare. But your brain couldn't compute that someone who looks like me could belong in your world. So you tried to glitch me out of existence. Ms. Vance, I beg you, Brent whispered, tears leaking from his eyes now. I have a mortgage. My mother is sick. I need this job. Naomi's expression didn't soften by a millimeter. And what if I had been a regular passenger, Brent? What if I wasn't a CEO? Would you have cared about my bills? My family? No. You would have kicked me into economy or off the plane and laughed about it later over drinks. She leaned in close. Karma is a nasty business, Brent. You tried to slam a door in my face. I just bought the whole building. She raised the phone one last time. Petra, the big one. Brent Carver, lead flight attendant. I have his file, Ms. Vance. He is to be terminated for cause, discriminatory practices, falsifying system errors to deny service, and gross insubordination. Furthermore, Naomi added, the final nail in the coffin, I want legal to draft a memo to the FAA and all partner airlines. I want his file marked, do not rehire, across the entire industry. He will never work above ground level again. A strangled cry escaped Brent's lips. No, you can't blackball me. That's illegal. Watch me, Naomi said. You messed with the wrong passenger. Badge. Brent stared at her with pure hatred now that begging had failed. He ripped his badge off his uniform and threw it at her feet. Pick it up, Naomi said calmly. Go to hell, he spat. Naomi looked at the remaining police officer. The officer stepped forward, placing a hand on his taser. Sir, pick up the badge and hand it to Ms. Vance. Do not make this worse. Trembling with rage and humiliation, Brent bent down, retrieved the plastic ID, and shoved it at Naomi. Get him out of my sight, Naomi said to the officer. As Brent was escorted away, broken and furious, Naomi looked around at the stunned terminal. The silence was broken only by the soft murmur of the crowd. She was exhausted. Her adrenaline was crashing. But there was one more thing to do. She walked over to the podium, where the gate agent's microphone sat. She picked it up. Attention in the terminal area, she said, her voice echoing one last time. For the passengers of the canceled Flight 402. My assistant is currently setting up a desk near Gate B44. Everyone on that flight will receive a full refund, a $5,000 travel voucher, and automatic upgrade status for 1 year. A cheer, tentative at first, then louder, went up from the crowd. We are cleaning house at Sterling High, Naomi promised them. It's going to take time, but I promise you, what you saw today ends today. She put down the microphone, picked up her old leather tote bag, and walked away from the gate. She needed a coffee. And then she had an airline to rebuild. If Saturday was the explosion, Monday was the nuclear winter. Naomi Vance sat at the head of the mahogany conference table in the penthouse boardroom of the Sterling High headquarters. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the New York skyline was gray and weeping with rain, matching the mood of the 12 men and women staring at her. These were the legacy board members, the old guard who had been skeptical of her takeover. The stock is down 4 points in pre-market trading, said James Thorndike, a man who looked like he had been carved out of expensive granite. He slid a tablet across the table. The incident on Saturday, it's everywhere, Ms. Vance. The Hoodie CEO. It's trending on X, TikTok, and Instagram. The PR team is overwhelmed. Naomi didn't look at the tablet. She sipped her black coffee. Good, Thorndike blinked. Good? Ms. Vance, we have a public relations crisis. People are saying our crew is racist. They are calling for boycotts. They aren't calling for a boycott of my airline, Naomi corrected him calmly. They are boycotting the old Sterling High. They are boycotting the culture that you allowed to fester for a decade. What they are cheering for, if you read the comments, James, is the cleanup. She pressed a button on the remote in her hand. The massive screen at the end of the room lit up. It wasn't a spreadsheet, it was a video. It was shaky footage taken by a teenager in seat 3F. It showed Brent Carver sneering, "First class is for paying customers." It showed Tiffany drinking the champagne. And it showed Captain Sterling looming over Naomi, threatening arrest. Then, it showed the pivot. The moment Naomi took the intercom. The moment the power shifted. This video has 22 million views in 48 hours, Naomi said. Read the comments, Thorndike squinted. Finally, someone holding these people accountable. I'm switching to Sterling High just because of her. The look on that flight attendant's face when she said she bought the airline priceless. We aren't losing customers, James, Naomi said, standing up and walking to the window. We are shedding dead weight. The 4 points we lost this morning will be back by Friday, doubled, because people buy into strength, and they buy into justice. While Naomi was commanding the boardroom, Brent Carver was sitting in a small, dingy office in Queens, sweating through a shirt he hadn't washed in 2 days. Across the desk sat Arthur Caldwell, a low-rent employment lawyer who usually handled slip-and-fall cases. Brent had been rejected by 3 major firms already. Caldwell was his last hope. "It's wrongful termination," Brent insisted, his voice high and thready. "She entrapped me. She didn't identify herself. She dressed like a bum on purpose to trick us. That has to be illegal, right? That's a hostile work environment." Caldwell sighed, rubbing his temples. He turned his laptop screen around. "Mr. Carver, have you seen this?" "I don't look at the internet," Brent snapped. "Well, you should. Because the internet has found everything. They found your old tweets making fun of passengers. Wait. They found a forum post from 2023 where you bragged about spilling coffee on a cheapskate in economy. You are radioactive." "That's hearsay!" Brent yelled. "I want to sue for $10 million. Defamation of character." Caldwell closed the laptop with a snap. "To win a defamation suit, Mr. Carver, the statement has to be false. She called you a bigot and incompetent. The video evidence proves both. If we sue Naomi Vance, she will countersue you for the cost of the canceled flight, the fuel dump, and the brand damage. She has a team of Harvard lawyers. You have me. And frankly, I'm not taking this case on contingency. Do you have a $5,000 retainer?" Brent stared at him. "I just lost my job. I don't have $5,000. "Then get out of my office," Caldwell said, gesturing to the door. Brent stumbled out onto the rainy street. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his landlord. "Rent is due on the 1st. Don't be late." He checked his bank account. He had $400. He had spent everything he made on designer clothes, leasing a BMW he couldn't afford, and bottle service at clubs to impress people he didn't like. He sat on a wet bench and wept, not because he was sorry, but because he realized the world he thought he owned had just foreclosed on him. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling was facing a different kind of tribunal. He sat in his living room in Connecticut. His wife, Patricia, was packing a suitcase. "It's just a suspension, Patty," Sterling lied, nursing a scotch. "I'll call the union representative. We'll get it sorted." Patricia stopped packing and looked at him. She held up her phone. "Richard, the FAA announced an inquiry an hour ago. They are reviewing your entire flight history. And I saw the video. That video is edited. It shows you grabbing a woman," Patricia said, her voice trembling. "A woman who was sitting quietly. You looked like a bully, Richard. I've spent 20 years making excuses for your temper. I told myself it was just stress, but watching you treat that woman like that, it made me sick." "I was the captain," Sterling roared, smashing his glass against the fireplace. "I demand respect." "You demand fear," Patricia corrected him, zipping up the bag. "And now you have nothing. I'm going to my sister's. Don't call me." The front door slammed. The silence that followed was louder than the jet engines Sterling would never hear again. He was a king of the sky, grounded forever in an empty castle. 6 months had passed since the incident that had shaken the aviation industry to its core. The calendar had turned to May, and the biting winds of November were replaced by a soft, persistent spring rain that washed over the glass facade of JFK's Terminal 4. Inside, however, the atmosphere had undergone a transformation far more radical than the changing seasons. Naomi Vance stepped through the sliding automatic doors, inhaling the scent of the terminal. It used to smell of stress and stale coffee. Now it smelled of fresh lilies and expensive polish. She paused for a moment, letting the bustle of the crowd wash over her. She looked different than she had on that fateful Saturday. The oversized charcoal hoodie and leggings were gone, replaced by a bespoke cream-colored power suit that accentuated her stature. Her hair was styled in a sleek, professional wave, and diamond studs glittered at her ears. But on her shoulder, clashing intentionally with the $5,000 suit, hung the same battered leather tote bag. It was her talisman, It was her reminder that power didn't come from what you wore, but from who you were. Naomi approached the sterling-high check-in counters. The old, intimidating barriers were gone, replaced by open concept pods. The staff looked different too. They were diverse, energetic, and most importantly, they were smiling. Not the tight, pained smiles of people fearing for their jobs, but genuine smiles of employees who felt valued. "Good morning, Ms. Vance," said the agent at the first-class pod. Her name tag read Jessica. She didn't cringe when Naomi approached. She stood taller. "It is an honor to have you flying with us today. We've prepared your suite." "Thank you, Jessica," Naomi said, placing her passport on the scanner. "How are the new shift rotations treating you?" "It's a different world, ma'am," Jessica replied, her eyes bright. "My daughter actually sees me on weekends now." "The morale, it's completely changed since the purge." The purge. That's what the staff called it. The week Naomi Vance had fired the toxic leadership and the bullies who had enabled them. It had been brutal, swift, and necessary. "I'm glad to hear it," Naomi said, taking her boarding pass. "Keep up the good work." Naomi moved toward the security checkpoint. She wasn't using the private VIP entrance today. She wanted to walk the floor. She wanted to see her empire from the ground level one last time before she turned her focus to the European expansion. She passed the duty-free shops and the high-end boutiques. The terminal was humming with the efficient rhythm of travel, but as she approached the central food court, the busy hub connecting the concourses, the rhythm faltered for her. Near a cluster of tables occupied by a noisy family eating burgers, a figure was bent over a trash receptacle. He was wrestling with an overflowing bag of garbage, his movements jerky and desperate. He wore a drab, ill-fitting gray jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. The uniform belonged to a third-party janitorial contractor, the kind hired for minimum wage to do the jobs no one else wanted. On his back, in fading red letters, was the word cleaning. Naomi slowed her pace. She knew that posture. She knew the shape of those shoulders, even if they were slumped in defeat rather than squared in arrogance. The man tied off the garbage bag and turned around, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a gloved hand. He looked gaunt. His skin was sallow, the result of too many double shifts and not enough sleep. His once impeccable blonde hair was buzzed short, revealing a scalp that looked vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was Brent Carver. The man who had once ruled the first-class cabin like a petty tyrant was now taking out the trash for the people he used to serve. Brent froze, his eyes locked onto Naomi's. For a second, he looked like he might run. He took a half-step back, colliding with a plastic chair. The noise was sharp and sudden, drawing the attention of a few nearby diners. Naomi didn't move. She simply stood there, a statue of calm judgment, in the middle of the chaotic food court. Brent swallowed hard. He looked at her suit, her diamonds, and then his eyes drifted to the leather tote bag. The recognition hit him like a physical blow, the memory of the hoodie, the memory of his own sneering voice. Slowly, painfully, Brent walked toward her. He didn't strut. He shuffled. He stopped 5 feet away, clutching a spray bottle of disinfectant like a shield. "Miss Vance," he rasped. His voice was rough, stripped of its polished veneer. "Brent," Naomi acknowledged, her tone neutral. "I see you're still working at the airport." Brent let out a dry, humorless laugh that turned into a cough. "Yeah, I'm here. Every day." He gestured vaguely around him with the spray bottle. "This is all I could get." "The industry is small," Naomi said. "News travels fast." "It wasn't just news," Brent said, his voice trembling with a mix of shame and lingering resentment. "You blacklisted me. I applied to Delta, United, even the budget carriers. My resume is poison. The moment they run my name, it comes up. Do not hire. Gross misconduct. I'm 32 years old, and I can't even get a job checking bags." "You made yourself a liability, Brent," Naomi replied, her voice cool and unyielding. "You proved that you couldn't be trusted with the safety and dignity of passengers. Why would any airline hire a risk like that?" Brent looked down at his rubber gloves. They were stained with ketchup and coffee. "I lost the apartment. I'm living in a basement studio in Queens. I take 2 buses to get here to scrub floors in the terminal where I used to be a lead attendant." He looked up, his eyes wet. "Do you know what that feels like? To have everyone look through you? To be invisible?" Naomi stepped closer, her expression tightening. "Invisible?" she repeated softly. "You mean like a black woman in a hoodie standing at a check-in counter? You mean like a passenger you ignored because they didn't fit your aesthetic?" Brent flinched. "You are experiencing the world exactly as you forced others to experience it," Naomi said. "You treated people like they were furniture. Now you're just part of the scenery. That isn't cruelty, Brent. It's symmetry." Brent's shoulders collapsed. The fight drained out of him. He knew she was right, and that was the hardest part. "What about the others?" he asked quietly, desperate to shift the focus from his own misery. "Tiffany." "Tiffany moved back to Ohio," Naomi said. "My HR team tells me she's waitressing at a roadside diner. She posted on social media that her feet hurt and customers don't tip. I assume she's learning similar lessons about humility." "And Captain Sterling?" "Retired without his pension," Naomi stated flatly. "He's facing a civil suit from the passengers of Flight 402 for the distress caused by the cancellation. He'll be spending his golden years in courtrooms, not cockpits." Brent nodded slowly. He looked at the floor, staring at a scuff mark on the linoleum. I guess I deserved it." "You did," Naomi agreed. She didn't offer forgiveness. Some things didn't require forgiveness. They just required acknowledgement. "But Brent," he looked up. "You're cleaning the floor," she said. "Do a good job. There is dignity in labor, as long as you do it with respect. Don't think you're above it. Because right now, this is who you are." Before Brent could respond, a voice boomed from the entrance of the lounge. "Ms. Vance, there you are." It was Mr. Henderson. The older gentleman looked dapper in a navy trench coat, waving a folded newspaper. He hurried over, ignoring Brent completely. "I was worried you'd been waylaid by the press." Mr. Henderson smiled, extending a hand. "The lounge is buzzing. Everyone is excited about the new London menu." "I was just catching up on some old business," Naomi said, turning her back on Brent. "It's good to see you, Mr. Henderson. Shall we?" "We shall," he grinned. As they walked away toward the first-class lounge, a teenager, running with a heavy backpack, clipped Brent's shoulder. The spray bottle flew out of his hand, clattering loudly across the floor and spilling blue liquid everywhere. "Watch it, janitor!" the kid yelled over his shoulder, not even stopping. Brent stood there, vibrating with the urge to scream. He wanted to yell, "Do you know who I am?" But he swallowed the words. He knew exactly who he was. He dropped to his knees, grabbed a rag from his belt, and began to wipe up the spill. From the glass doors of the lounge, Naomi glanced back one last time. She saw the man on his knees, scrubbing the floor of her terminal. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just adjusted her tote bag, turned forward, and walked into the sanctuary of the lounge. An hour later, Flight 402 to London was cleared for takeoff. Naomi sat in seat 1A. It was the same seat, but the air felt lighter. The lie-flat pod was freshly upholstered, and the lighting was a soft, welcoming amber. Across the aisle in 2A, Mr. Henderson raised his crystal flute of champagne. "To the new Sterling High," he toasted, "and to the woman who cleaned house." Naomi raised her glass, the bubbles dancing in the light. "To dignity," she corrected him gently, "and to never forgetting where we came from." "To dignity," Henderson agreed. The engines roared, a deep, powerful thrum that vibrated through the floorboards. The aircraft surged forward, pressing Naomi back into her seat. She watched out the window as the terminal rushed by, blurring into a streak of gray and glass. Somewhere down there, amidst the blur, Brent Carver was wiping a table. Somewhere down there, the past was being scrubbed away. As the nose of the jet lifted, Piercing the rain clouds and breaking into the brilliant, blinding sunshine above, Naomi Vance finally smiled. The turbulence was behind her. The sky was wide open, and this time she was flying the plane. Naomi Vance didn't just buy a ticket. She bought the lesson of a lifetime for a crew that thought they were untouchable. This story is a powerful reminder that you should never judge a book by its cover or a CEO by her hoodie. Brent and his team learned the hard way that true class isn't about the price of your ticket, but how you treat people when you think no one is watching. Karma didn't just knock on their door. It kicked it down and served them a reality check they will never forget. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with your friends to remind them to always be kind, and make sure you subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.